is here to help stressed out, overwhelmed caregivers as we parent our children in the new world of the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm your host, Mark Gallivan, a father and a staff member at a self-directed democratic school in Colorado, USA called Alpine Valley School.
And I'm your other host, Kate Coleman, a mother and also co-founder and staff member at a Sudbury school in the UK, East Kent Sudbury School. Today's episode is about a subject near and dear to both our hearts. We're talking about self-directed democratic schools themselves. It's an exciting episode for us, but our goal is not to push our own agendas, but to offer a closer look at a style of education we feel is humane, kind and empowering for young people.
Having homeschooled, whether we like it or not, for the past few months has allowed many parents to re-examine their relationships with our children's education overall. If you've listened to this show for a while, you'll know that we covered a lot of this ground already, and we wanted to focus in rather specifically on one type of alternative education.
Before we jump in, I'd like to explain a little bit more about what self-directed democratic education actually means. The self-directed part of the school indicates that students are free to spend their time following their own interests. Rather than a predefined curriculum or courses in particular subjects, students define for themselves what they're interested in pursuing. They connect with others who have similar goals and ask for help from adults when and if they need it.
The democratic aspect refers to the way the school is actually run. Rather than having a set of adults in charge of the day-to-day administration of the school is run through a democratic process that includes all students and staff. The power to have a voice and a vote extends to all aspects of life at school, including hiring and firing of the teachers, creating rules, and adjudicating alleged rule violations. Students are an integral part of it all.
There are several different ways that democratic schools can operate, but today we're focusing on one model called the Sudbury model, which are the kind of schools that Mark and I are involved in. If you want to learn more about other kinds of democratic or self-directed learning environments, I'd really recommend listening to our previous episode called Moving Forwards, Not Backwards.
In this episode, we interviewed our co-workers and founders of their respective schools, Larry Welshon from Alpine Valley School in the US, and Kezia Cantwell-Wright from East Kent Sudbury School in the UK.
Kezia and Larry shared with us how they came to democratic education, what prompted them to start their own schools, and what makes the Sudbury model so unique and powerful. Here are Kezia and Larry.
My name is Larry Welshon, and I came to democratic education when my child was about to be born. My wife and I were both public school teachers, and we wanted to make sure that our kids were raised in an environment that respected their humanity and their individual autonomy. And when we found out about the Sudbury model, we fell in love with it immediately and worked to start Alpine Valley School, actually long before Ethan was ready for school. But by the time he was 4, the school was open and both of my children went through Alpine Valley School from the beginning of their schooling career till graduation.
Hi, my name is Kezia Cantwell-Wright, and I'm a staff member and founder at East Kent Sudbury School. I discovered democratic education when I was about 8 years old, and I was really suffering and struggling in school. We'd had a personal tragedy in our family, and I was not in a good place. And my mum very wisely said, I think what we need is something completely different. And she had heard of a school nearby. We lived in Suffolk in the UK at the time, called Summerhill. And my mum said to me, well, what do you think? This decision is up to you. And I thought, yeah, let's do it. And I went and I spent one glorious year at Summerhill, that it was like a beacon in my childhood of freedom and play and sheer joy and happiness. That experience stayed with me for a really, really, really long time. At the same time, I guess, as you do, you move on with your life, and I pushed it somewhat to the side. And when my children were getting to the age where we were deciding what to do with their schooling, we decided we were going to home educate and follow their interests at home. And that worked brilliantly for the first few years until my daughter started to get to an age where she wanted more independence. And At that point, I picked up a book called Free to Learn by Peter Gray, and it was like a light bulb went off in my head, and I put together the experience we'd had from home education with that amazing experience I had in childhood of going to Summerhill, and I thought that's exactly what we need. We need a democratic school where they can be free to learn whatever they want, but they're also part of a community where they learn to be responsible for themselves and for other people and to have their voice empowered. And not finding a school like that nearby, I decided to create one, as you do. The experience at Summerhill changed how I saw learning, and it changed my relationship to authority and to community and to lots of things. And I think in terms of learning, the thing that I understood from that experience was that you can't make someone learn something. You know, you can teach them all you want, but if they're not interested and they don't want to learn it, then the words will go in one ear and out the other. It just wash over them. You have to want to learn something. And when you want to learn something, you learn it really well, you learn it really deeply, and you often learn it really quickly as well. The other side of the coin, if you like, was the experience of being in a community. There were a couple of times when I and my friends broke some rules. We got up to some mischief. There was an incident with bath water and the library below. I learned really deeply that we're not only responsible for our own actions, we're responsible for the effect that we have on the people around us. And it was a really profound learning experience that hopefully stuck with me more deeply than the water stains on the books.
When I was a young teacher in the public school system, I worked with dropouts, and they often had left school at a very young age, either mentally or physically or both. And they always left the system because the system had hurt them, every one of them. And they were then coming back to the school that I was working at for a credential that they could achieve by taking a series of tests. And what I saw consistently in the years that I was there is that when a person has a real desire to learn something, they do it. And they don't need much help from me. When they came back to get this one thing done, they could do it. And I think that speaks to what Kezia was saying about that education has to be within themselves, and they can do it. And that's what I saw year after year, kids coming in and doing that work and getting it done and moving on with their lives. I think there's probably a number of ways and reasons why it's important to give kids a voice in a democratic society. Part of it is that it gives them a sense of ownership in the community that they're part of. So at Alpine Valley School, decisions that are important to the school are made democratically by the school meeting, which is students and staff, each of whom have one vote. And there's deliberation, and the rule is made or decision is made, and everybody has the opportunity to express their thoughts on the issue and talk about it over the course of typically 2 weeks, right? There's a first reading and a second reading, which gives everybody a chance to really think about it. I think one of the benefits of that is that kids and adults too, I mean, I'm part of the school, right? I'm a staff member. I have one vote. It does, as Kezia was suggesting, give you a greater sense of ownership in the community aspect of the school. The rules of the school are not hopefully arbitrary. Hopefully they're not capricious. Hopefully they're there for a reason. And they are. The opportunity for kids and the community to come together and figure out what needs to happen gives you the ownership of the community. And I think the only way that you can legitimately do that is by allowing those daily participants a voice in saying how things are to be run.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think for me, there's two sides to it. One is the life that the child is living right now, that childhood isn't a rehearsal for something later. They are living their lives, and that children are humans and they have a right to have a say in the things that affect them. Decisions about where they can eat or what they should do or what staff members they get to spend their time with, what rules limit their play, or how conflicts are sorted out. These are all things that really matter to kids and in their lives right now. And when you give them the opportunity to express how they feel about those things, they take that responsibility really seriously. They don't just vote to spend the whole annual budget on candy. And then the other thing is to do with the fact that we're raising the adults of the future. And if in a liberal democratic society, you want to raise engaged citizens, people that understand what democracy is, that know what the processes are to make a change if they think that something offends them, to know how to have their say and to engage in politics, to be able to follow debate. They need experience of that. You can't raise someone in an authoritarian regime for 18 years of their life and then say, hey, now you have an empowered choice. Because they're not used to being empowered, they're used to being submissive. To me, it's about the life they're living now and being able to be an effective member of society in the future.
At a fundamental level, we're creating a little society that is a scaled down version of what's going on in the larger society. And if our larger societies are based on the rule of law, principles of self-government, the idea that people are responsible for their own lives and their own behaviors, the idea that people are responsible for the community within which they live. If you are conventionally schooled, you are learning about those ideas intellectually. You're being preached at about those ideas in books and by your teachers, but you're not living it. At a school like Alpine Valley School, or East Kent Sudbury School, the students are living the principles that we believe are important once they become adults. I can imagine that you've spoken at other times on this podcast about the importance of play, and that play is really the work of children, and play is how they understand the world and how they become adults. So play, the importance of play cannot be overstated. And that's what kids do when they are free. They're playing, they're figuring out who they are, their place in the community. Oftentimes, at some point in their teen years, they do start to think more explicitly about the future, because it's all of a sudden looming on the horizon. And, in 30 years of teaching and talking to teenagers, I've seen this many times, that there's some uneasiness, and that is an important part of the process of learning. And it's in those times that the learning process maybe changes from what you might typically look at as play to playing maybe with ideas and playing with talking about what that future is going to look like. And I think at a time like that, being in a mixed age community surrounded by loving and caring adults is crucially important.
To me, the most important thing, the thing that I want for the future of education, is choice. The same system doesn't suit every child, and it doesn't suit every family. And there are lots of innovative and interesting types of schools around the world, but they're usually really small and far and few between. I think it's so empowering if a child can know, if they're in a mainstream type environment, that actually they have a choice to go somewhere else. I don't think every school in the world should be a democratic school. I don't think every family and every child would choose that. But I do think every school should respect children's human rights and should ask them what they're interested in and pay an interest in what the child is interested in and the future that child is going to lead, and that they should have some way to input into the curriculum and the structures of the school that they're a part of.
That does it for this episode of the Lockdown Learning Podcast. We would love to hear your feedback, as well as any other suggestions you have for future episodes. You can contact the show via email at lockdownlearningpodcast@gmail.com.
If you'd like to learn more about the Sudbury model, We've included lots of resources in the show notes for this episode, including a directory of schools all over the world. You can find out more about our specific locations by visiting our websites. East Kent Sudbury School is online at ekss.org.uk and Alpine Valley is online at www.alpinevalleyschool.com.
In our next episode, we'll be diving deep into the subject of play. Why is play so important in the lives of children? What do they really get out of it? And why do we believe they ought to be allowed to do it as much as possible? We will cover all that and more.
Look for that episode coming next week. Thanks for listening today. I'm Kate.
And I'm Mark. And this is the Lockdown Learning Podcast. Until next time, remember to take a deep breath, hug your kids, and pat yourself on the back because we know you absolutely deserve it.